What does courage really mean to you? David asked, a slight smirk dancing on his lips. The group of kids gathered around the old man, clearly expecting a laughable response, like the kind of tall tales they'd heard on TV. You don't look like the type who's been to war, old man. Thomas Walker, sitting alone on the park bench, didn't flinch. His weathered face remained calm, his blue eyes steady. He didn't respond immediately, just glanced at the sky, the faint clouds reflecting the late afternoon sun. His silence only seemed to provoke them more. David nudged his friend, a whisper carrying through the air. I bet he's just some old guy who thinks he knows everything. Probably never even left the country. The others laughed, their voices mingling in the warm breeze. But Thomas still said nothing, letting the chatter wash over him. He had lived through more than they could ever imagine, and now, all he could do was listen. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he looked at David and spoke, his voice gravelly but clear. Courage, he said, is not about fighting or being brave in the face of battle. It's about standing up for those who can't stand for themselves. The group of kids froze. Thomas' words hung in the air like a sudden, unexpected storm. David raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? You mean like standing up to bullies? No, Thomas replied, a faint smile crossing his lips. Not bullies. Real courage is about being willing to sacrifice everything, not for yourself, but for others. For the people you care about. For the ones who are too scared to stand on their own. The group shifted uncomfortably. One of the kids, Sarah, bit her lip. But that's just what you hear in movies. It can't be real. Thomas' eyes softened, and for the first time, he looked them all over, really looked at them. Movies make it look easy. But in real life, the hardest part is not knowing if you'll make it out alive, yet still choosing to do the right thing. The kids were quiet now, the playful tone of their voices evaporating. A few exchanged glances, unsure of how to respond. They had come to make fun of the old man, but now they weren't so sure. Let me tell you a story, Thomas continued. It was a long time ago, in a place far from here. I was just a kid, like you. We were in the jungles of Vietnam, surrounded by enemies we couldn't see. We didn't have fancy technology or support. Just each other. His voice grew distant, as if he was reliving it all over again. One day, I had to make a choice. One of my comrades, a young kid, scared out of his mind, was pinned down, unable to move. He called for help. And without thinking, I ran out into the open to save him. I didn't know if I'd make it, but I knew he wouldn't survive without me. I didn't think about it, I just did it. He paused for a moment, his gaze drifting off into the distance. That, kids, is what courage is. It's about acting when you're scared. It's about not giving up, even when the odds are stacked against you. It's about looking at the ones who need you and choosing them over yourself. The silence among the kids deepened. They had expected a joke, something trivial, but instead, they got the weight of a lifetime's worth of experiences. Thomas' voice broke the quiet. And that's why courage doesn't look like what you see in the movies. It's quiet, unassuming, and it doesn't seek praise. It's simply doing what's right when it matters the most. David opened his mouth to speak but stopped himself. The realization hit him like a truck, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure what to say. The others stood there, unsure of what they had just witnessed. But they were different now. They couldn't go back to the way they were before. And Thomas, the old man they had mocked, simply smiled and stood up, nodding in silent acknowledgement of what had just passed between them. He didn't need to say anything more. His actions had spoken louder than words ever could. Thomas Walker sat back down on the park bench, his eyes still gazing out at the horizon as the kid stood there, processing the weight of his words. The park was quieter now, the sounds of birds chirping and the distant chatter of people in the background seemed to fade away. For a moment, there was nothing but the quiet understanding that had settled over them. David, who had been the loudest of the group, was now silent. His friends shifted uneasily, unsure of how to react. They had come here to laugh, to mock the old man, but now, they were left with nothing but the raw honesty of his experience. Sarah was the first to break the silence. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. How did you know what to do? How did you know he needed you? Thomas' gaze shifted to her, and for the first time, his expression softened. When you've been through enough, you start to sense things. You feel it in your bones. You know when someone's in need, even when they can't speak it. It's not about knowing exactly what to do, it's about not turning away when you see someone suffering. Sarah nodded, her eyes wide as she absorbed his words. She had always thought courage was something flashy, something that happened in the heat of the moment, but Thomas had shown her that true courage was quiet, unspoken, and often unseen by others. Another kid, Jake, shuffled his feet nervously. But, weren't you scared? I mean, if you're running out there, knowing you could die, how do you keep going? Thomas let out a soft chuckle, the sound like gravel scraping against stone. Of course, I was scared. We were all scared. But sometimes you push through the fear. You don't do it because you're brave, you do it because someone else's life depends on it. You find the strength to act because you have no other choice. The group was silent again, each kid lost in their own thoughts. They had always been told that bravery was about doing things without fear, but here was Thomas, telling them that courage was about facing fear head-on and continuing to move forward, regardless of the consequences. It was a concept they hadn't truly grasped before. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the park, David finally spoke, his voice quieter than it had been all afternoon. You really think we could be like that? You really think we could have that kind of courage? Thomas looked at him, his eyes steady, but there was a depth there that the kids hadn't noticed before. I don't think it's about being like me, he said. I think it's about finding your own courage. It's in all of you. It's in the choices you make when nobody's watching. When you stand up for someone who can't stand up for themselves. When you do what's right, even when it's hard. The kids stood there, a mixture of awe and uncertainty in their eyes. They had expected to walk away from this moment with a funny story, a joke to tell their friends, but instead, they walked away with something far more valuable. A new understanding of courage, one that wasn't tied to grand gestures or medals, but to the quiet strength of doing what was right. As they slowly began to disperse, Sarah took one last look at Thomas. Thank you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas nodded, his lips curving into a faint smile. You're welcome, kid. Just remember, courage doesn't need applause. It's enough that you know it when it's called for. And with that, the group of kids walked away, each of them carrying a little more than they had come with, an understanding of courage that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Thomas Walker slowly made his way down the park path, his steps measured but deliberate. The evening sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The kids, who had gathered around him just moments before, were nowhere in sight now. He could still feel the weight of the conversation hanging in the air, a quiet reminder of the lessons they had taken with them. But as he walked, he couldn't help but wonder if they truly understood what he had tried to share with them. The truth about courage was not something you could explain in just a few words. It took years of living, of making choices that shaped you, to truly comprehend what it meant to be brave. As he passed the old oak tree that stood near the park bench, Thomas paused, letting the cool evening breeze wash over him. His mind drifted back to the day when he first learned what real courage was. It was a day that, like so many others, had started just like any other. But it turned into something he would never forget. He was a young man back then, just a kid, barely out of high school, and he had joined the military to escape a life that seemed too small for him. The day they gave him his orders was the day his life changed forever. He had no idea what he was stepping into, no idea that his world would be turned upside down in ways he could never imagine. It was in the heat of battle, amidst the noise and chaos of the jungle, that he had learned what courage truly meant. It wasn't about charging into the fray without fear, it was about making the decision to move forward, even when fear gripped your every muscle. It was about trusting the men next to you, knowing that if you faltered, they would be there to catch you. Courage, he had learned, was not a choice, it was a duty. And in that moment, when the weight of the world seemed to press down on him, it was his comrades who reminded him of that. The soldiers beside him, all of them young, scared, but steadfast, had shown him what it meant to be brave. They had risked their lives to save one another, to protect each other, not because they were fearless, but because they knew they were stronger together. And that strength, Thomas realized, was where true courage came from. It wasn't about standing alone, facing the world. It was about standing with others, facing the challenges together, and knowing that, no matter what happened, you would always have each other's back. As the years passed, those memories stayed with him, guiding him through the toughest moments of his life. Now, as he stood in this park, the weight of his experiences pressing down on him, he couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility to pass that knowledge on. The kids may not fully grasp it now, but one day, they would understand. One day, they would face a moment where courage would no longer be a choice, but a necessity. And when that day came, he hoped they would remember his words. The sun dipped lower in the sky, and Thomas finally reached the end of the path. He turned to look back at the park, his mind still replaying the conversation with the kids. They had walked away with more than just a lesson, they had walked away with a glimpse into the kind of courage that lived inside all of them. And maybe, just maybe, that glimpse would be enough to guide them when they needed it most. The following weekend, Thomas returned to the same park bench, as he did every Saturday afternoon. He had come to enjoy the peace here, the rhythm of time passing slowly. Yet, something felt different today. As he settled onto the bench, his gaze fell upon the same group of kids from last week, now gathered a little further away, speaking in low voices. He hadn't expected them to return, let alone come back to him. It was as if the conversation had planted a seed, one that was growing in their minds. Sarah was the first to approach him, her steps tentative at first, but gaining confidence with each stride. Her eyes were softer than before, as if she had carried something heavy and was now ready to set it down. "Mr. Walker," she said, her voice steady but still a little uncertain. "Can we talk to you again?" Thomas smiled gently and nodded, motioning for her to sit beside him. "Of course, Sarah. What's on your mind?" The others soon followed, gathering around him once more. David, the boy who had been the most skeptical, stood a little apart, his arms crossed as if to protect himself. He had been quiet all week, but now, his eyes met Thomas with a different kind of curiosity. "We've been thinking," Sarah continued, "about what you said last week. About courage." She paused, as if searching for the right words. "It's just, we didn't realize it meant all that. We thought it was just about doing something brave in a fight, like the movies show. But now, it feels different." Thomas nodded, his expression calm. Courage is not about glory or fame. It's about doing the right thing, even when it's hard. It's about being strong when you'd rather be weak, and being there for others, even when they can't ask for help. The kids were listening intently now, no longer with the same skepticism that had colored their thoughts before. David took a slow step forward, his voice softer than it had been the first time they spoke. "I still don't get it, though. How can we know when the right time to be courageous is? It seems like such a big thing." Thomas thought for a moment, then pointed to the quiet path that ran through the park, lined with trees that swayed in the gentle breeze. "It's like walking down this path. You don't always see what's ahead, but you have to keep moving forward. Sometimes, you'll come across a moment, a decision, and you'll know. It won't always be easy, but when it happens, you'll feel it in your heart. That's when you find your courage." The group was silent for a moment, each of them lost in thought. They had been raised in a world where everything was clear-cut, easy to define. But what Thomas was telling them was that courage wasn't about a single moment, it was about the decisions they made every day. It was in the small things, the moments where they could choose to do the right thing, even when no one was watching. Sarah's voice broke the silence. "So, it's not about waiting for some big event to be brave. It's about the little moments." Thomas smiled, his eyes gleaming with understanding. "Exactly. The little things are what matter most. They shape who you become." The big moments come and go, but the little choices you make every day, that's where true courage lies. David finally uncrossed his arms, the tension easing from his posture. I think I get it now. It's not about doing something big. It's about doing what's right, even if it's hard. Thomas nodded, pleased with the realization settling in the kid's eyes. That's it, David. It's about choosing to be a person who does what's right, no matter what. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, casting a golden light across the park. The kids stood up, ready to leave, but they weren't the same group that had arrived. They had changed in some subtle way, each carrying with them a newfound understanding of courage. As they walked away, Sarah turned to Thomas and smiled. Thanks, Mr. Walker. We'll remember that. Thomas smiled back, watching them go, knowing that he had given them something far more valuable than just a lesson. He had given them the courage to find their own path, one step at a time. Weeks passed, and Thomas continued to visit the park every Saturday. The weather had started to shift, and the golden hues of fall began to take over the landscape. The kids had been gone for a while, but Thomas couldn't help but wonder how they were doing, whether they were starting to understand what he had shared with them. He wasn't one to expect immediate results, but he hoped that, somewhere deep inside, they had carried that lesson with them. On one particular Saturday afternoon, as he made his way to his usual bench, he spotted them again, Sarah, David, and the rest of the group, standing at the edge of the park, talking in low voices. This time, there was no laughter, no teasing. They looked serious, focused. Sarah was the first to notice him, and she waved him over. Mr. Walker, she called out. We wanted to talk to you again. Thomas nodded, his face breaking into a smile. Of course. Come sit down, he said, gesturing to the bench. The group walked over and sat down around him, their faces reflecting a sense of purpose that had been missing before. Thomas could see the difference in their eyes, the uncertainty was gone, replaced by something steadier. Sarah spoke first, her voice calm but filled with sincerity. We've been thinking a lot about what you said. About courage, and what it really means. David, who had been quieter than usual, nodded in agreement. Yeah, it's different than we thought. We thought courage was only about doing big things, like running into danger or fighting battles. But now we realize it's about the little things. About doing what's right, even when it's hard. Thomas smiled gently, glad to see they had grasped the essence of it. Exactly. Courage is not always about grand gestures. Sometimes, it's about doing the right thing when no one is looking, standing up for someone when it's easier to walk away, or being kind when the world seems indifferent. The group was silent for a moment, processing his words. They weren't just words to them anymore, they were starting to see the truth behind them. Sarah spoke again, her voice a little more confident now. You were right. It's about the choices we make every day, even when it's not the easiest choice. That's right, Thomas replied, his eyes bright with approval. Every small decision adds up. It's those small moments of integrity and kindness that define who you are in the end. And when the big moments come, you'll be ready, because you've already been practicing courage every day. David looked at him, a thoughtful expression on his face. You know, I didn't really get it until now. I used to think courage was just about being fearless, but now I realize it's about feeling that fear and still moving forward. It's about doing the right thing even when it scares you. Thomas nodded, feeling a warmth spread through him. You've got it, David. The real test of courage is what you do with your fear. It doesn't go away, but you learn to move forward with it. That's when you know you're on the right path. The conversation flowed easily now, with each of the kids sharing their own thoughts about what courage meant to them. It was no longer just a lesson, it had become something they could all relate to, something they could apply in their own lives. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, the group stood up to leave. They had learned something valuable that day, something that would stay with them long after they left the park. Sarah turned to Thomas before walking away. Thank you, Mr. Walker. You've given us something to think about. Thomas smiled, his heart feeling lighter than it had in a long time. "You're welcome, Sarah. Just remember, courage isn't about being perfect, it's about doing your best, even when it's hard. And that's something you'll carry with you, always." As the group walked off into the fading light, Thomas stayed behind for a moment, watching them go. He knew they would face challenges in their lives, moments where they would have to choose courage over fear. And he was certain that, because of the lessons they had learned that day, they would be ready. It had been a few months since Thomas had last seen the kids from the park. The crisp autumn air had now turned to the chill of early winter, and the days were shorter, the nights colder. But every Saturday, Thomas still found his way to the park. It had become part of his routine, a place to reflect and remember. Today, as he made his way down the familiar path to his bench, he noticed a few figures sitting nearby. It was them, the same group of kids who had once gathered around him, asking about courage. They were older now, their faces a little more mature, their expressions thoughtful. Sarah was the first to notice him. She stood up quickly, waving him over with a smile. "Mr. Walker. It's so good to see you again." Her voice was warm, and there was a comfort in her tone that made Thomas feel like time hadn't passed at all. He walked over slowly, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his jacket. "Hello, Sarah. It's good to see you all." The others stood up as well, David among them. He was still the same quiet kid, but now there was a certain calm about him, a steadiness that hadn't been there before. "We were just talking about you," David said, his voice calm but with a hint of something deeper in it. "About everything you taught us." Thomas raised an eyebrow, curious. "Oh? And what's that?" Sarah spoke up again, her eyes bright. "About courage, Mr. Walker. You were right. It's not about doing big things. It's about the small decisions, the ones that shape who we are." Thomas smiled, pleased that they had carried the lesson with them. "I'm glad to hear that. You're beginning to understand what it truly means." "We've been using it," David said quietly. "The courage you talked about. The little moments, standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. It's been helping me, more than I thought it would." Sarah nodded, her expression serious. "I used to think it was just about being brave in the big moments. But now I know that those moments don't come unless you've practiced courage in the small things first. I had a chance to do that at school this week." Thomas leaned in slightly, interested. "What happened?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, then spoke with more confidence. "There was a new kid at school. He was being picked on by a few of the other kids. I didn't want to get involved at first. I thought it wasn't my business. But then I remembered what you said. I went up to him, and I told the other kids to stop. I didn't think about it, I just acted. And it felt good. It felt right." Thomas' heart swelled with pride. That's exactly what courage is. It's not waiting for the perfect moment, it's doing what you know is right, even when it's difficult. The group fell silent for a moment, each of them reflecting on what Sarah had just shared. David spoke up again, his voice steady. "I did something similar. There was a project at school where everyone else was just copying off each other, trying to get the answers without doing the work. I almost joined in, but then I remembered what you said. I chose to do it the right way, even though it meant staying up late and doing the hard work. It was harder, but I felt better about it." Thomas nodded, impressed. "You both are learning what it means to lead with integrity. That's the essence of true courage, doing the right thing, not because it's easy, but because it's necessary." As the sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows over the park, Thomas stood up. "I have to get going now, but I'm proud of you all. Keep choosing the right path, even when it's not the easiest." Sarah smiled at him, her face glowing with gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Walker. You don't know how much this has changed things for us." The group stood together, ready to leave, their hearts lighter than when they arrived. Thomas watched them go, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. They had understood the lesson. And now, they would carry it with them for the rest of their lives. He turned and began walking toward the park's exit, the cold air biting at his cheeks, but his heart warm with the knowledge that his lessons had not fallen on deaf ears. In a way, he had passed the torch to them. And one day, they would do the same for someone else. It had been a few months since Thomas had last seen the kids from the park. The season had shifted once again, and the bright colors of spring had begun to replace the cold grip of winter. The days were getting longer, and the air felt warmer, full of promise. But Thomas continued to make his way to the park every Saturday, just as he always had. It was his routine, his way of grounding himself, and he found peace in the quiet moments spent on the same bench. Today, however, was different. As he approached, he noticed that the group of kids was already there, gathered around the bench. They were no longer the same young, uncertain kids they had been before. They were older now, their faces showing the growth of time and experience. Sarah was the first to notice him. Her face broke into a smile when she saw him, and she waved excitedly. "Mr. Walker!" she called out. The others turned to look, and David, who had once been quiet and reserved, now smiled as well. "Hey, Mr. Walker," he greeted him. It was a warm welcome, one that made Thomas feel a sense of pride. He walked over to the bench and sat down, feeling the familiar comfort of the spot beneath him. The kids joined him, sitting a little closer this time, as if eager to talk. "We've been meaning to talk to you," Sarah said, her tone different from before. There was a maturity in her voice now, a sense of understanding that had been missing in their earlier conversations. "We've been thinking about everything you've told us." David nodded, his expression serious. "Yeah. We're starting to get it. The courage thing. It's not what we thought." Thomas listened closely, his eyes softening as he watched them. "Go on," he encouraged them. Sarah took a deep breath. "We've been practicing it. In small ways, like you said. Not just waiting for big moments to be brave, but doing the right thing every day, even when it's hard." David spoke next. "I had a chance to step up at school. Some kids were being left out, and I thought about what you said, how courage is about standing up for others, even when it's difficult. So, I just did it. It wasn't easy, but it felt right." Thomas nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "That's the essence of it," he said. "You don't wait for courage to come to you. You make it. Every decision you make, every action you take, it's all part of who you are becoming." Sarah's eyes sparkled with realization. "It's like what you said, Mr. Walker. It's about making the choice to be brave in the small moments. The moments that matter the most." Thomas smiled, his face lighting up with approval. "Exactly. The small moments are what build you up, and when the big moments come, you'll be ready. Courage is not about a single act, but about who you are in every moment of your life." The kids were silent for a moment, each of them reflecting on what had been said. It was clear they were beginning to truly understand the meaning of courage. They weren't just hearing it anymore, they were living it. "We just wanted to thank you, Mr. Walker," Sarah said, her voice sincere, "for helping us understand what it really means." David nodded, his face filled with gratitude. "You've made a real difference. We won't forget what you taught us." Thomas looked at them, his heart full. "I'm proud of all of you. You've taken the lesson and made it your own. That's what matters." As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the park, the group stood up to leave. They had come full circle, no longer just kids seeking answers, but young people who had found their own understanding of courage. They walked away with their heads held high, their hearts full of purpose. Thomas watched them go, knowing that they would carry what they had learned with them for the rest of their lives. And as he sat there alone, the park quiet once again, he felt a sense of peace. He had done what he set out to do, he had shared a lesson, and now, it was up to them to pass it on. Months had passed since Thomas had seen the kids from the park. The seasons had changed once again, and with the arrival of spring, there was a sense of renewal in the air. The days were growing warmer, and the trees were beginning to bloom, their leaves a vibrant green. But even with the changes around him, Thomas continued to make his weekly visits to the park. It had become a routine, something he looked forward to each week. He had not expected to see the kids again, but as he made his way toward his usual bench one Saturday afternoon, he spotted them sitting nearby. They were gathered together, deep in conversation. As he approached, Sarah looked up and waved. Her face lit up as she saw him. "Mr. Walker," she called, and the others turned to look, all smiling warmly. They had changed, of course. They were no longer the same kids who had first approached him in the park. They had grown in ways that Thomas could see just by looking at them. He walked over and sat down beside them. "Hello, everyone," he said, his voice calm and welcoming. "It's good to see you again." David, who had once been the most reserved, spoke up first. "We've been thinking about everything you taught us, Mr. Walker." "We really have," he said, his voice steady, his eyes meeting Thomas. "We wanted to tell you how much it's meant to us." Sarah nodded, her expression sincere. "It's changed the way we look at things. We've been trying to live what you said, to make the right choices, even when it's hard." Thomas smiled softly. "I'm glad to hear that. It's about making those choices, not just once, but every day. It's about being the person who does the right thing, even when no one else is looking." David looked at him thoughtfully. "We're starting to get it. Courage isn't just about doing something big and heroic. It's about being consistent, about standing up for what's right, even when it's easier not to." Sarah added, "It's also about being there for people, not because we're expected to, but because we care. It's about doing the small things, too, even if they seem insignificant." Thomas nodded, pleased with their understanding. "Exactly. It's the small moments that define us. That's where real courage lies." The kids were quiet for a moment, their faces reflecting a deeper understanding. They had come a long way since that first conversation, when they had thought courage was just about grand gestures. Now they saw it for what it truly was, something much more profound. "I had a moment last week," Sarah continued, her voice steady, "where I had to stand up for a friend. I didn't want to, but I remembered what you said, and I just did it. It wasn't easy, but it felt right. And afterward, I knew I had done the right thing." David nodded in agreement. "I had a similar situation. There was a chance to take the easy way out, to let someone else handle something that wasn't my responsibility. But I remembered what you said, and I stepped in. It was hard, but I felt proud afterward." Thomas's heart swelled with pride as he listened to them. That's what it's all about. Making those choices, even when it's not easy. You're both learning what it means to lead with integrity. As the conversation continued, it was clear that the kids had truly embraced what Thomas had shared with them. They were no longer just talking about courage, they were living it. They had learned that courage wasn't a single moment in time, but a series of decisions, made every day, that shaped who they were. As the afternoon wore on, the kids stood up to leave, their faces filled with a quiet confidence. "Thank you, Mr. Walker," Sarah said, her voice filled with gratitude. "For everything. You've really changed the way we see the world." David gave him a small smile. "We won't forget what you taught us." "Thank you." Thomas watched them walk away, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. They had taken the lesson to heart, and now, they would carry it with them, passing it on to others as they grew. It was moments like this, when he saw the impact of his words, that reminded him why he came to the park every week. He had given them something that would last, a lesson in courage that would stay with them for a lifetime. Years had passed since Thomas had first shared his lessons on courage with a group of kids in the park. The seasons had come and gone, and life had a way of moving forward, whether you were ready or not. Thomas still made his weekly visits, though now, the park seemed quieter. Fewer people came out to enjoy the day, the benches sat empty, and the once vibrant leaves were now shades of brown. He sat on his usual bench, watching the world around him slowly change. But one Saturday afternoon, something caught his eye. From across the park, he noticed a familiar group walking toward him. It was them, the same kids who had once gathered around him, now older, more mature, yet still carrying that same spark in their eyes. "Sarah," David, and the others. They had all grown up, yet Thomas could see that they were still carrying the lessons he had shared with them all those years ago. Sarah was the first to approach him, her steps confident, but still filled with the warmth Thomas remembered. "Mr. Walker," she said, her voice familiar and kind. "We've been looking for you." Thomas stood and smiled, a feeling of pride swelling in his chest. "I wasn't expecting to see you all today," he said, motioning for them to sit. "What brings you here?" David, who had once been quiet and reserved, now spoke with a newfound certainty. "We wanted to thank you, Mr. Walker," he said, his voice steady and sincere. "Everything you taught us, it really stuck with us. We've been living it, every day." Thomas raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. "And how's that been going?" Sarah answered first, her eyes thoughtful. "It's not easy, but it's made us better. We're making better choices, standing up for what's right, even when it's hard." David nodded. "We've had moments when it would have been easier to walk away, but we remembered what you said. And we stepped up." Thomas smiled, feeling a quiet joy. "You're doing exactly what I hoped you would do. You're living the lesson." Sarah's voice grew more reflective. "It's not always about doing something big. Sometimes it's in the little things, the things that no one else sees. The small moments," Thomas agreed, "are the ones that truly define you." The group was silent for a moment, each of them lost in their own thoughts. It was clear to Thomas that the kids had not only understood his lesson, but had made it a part of their lives. They were no longer just kids learning about courage, they were young adults, each carrying their own sense of strength and integrity. After a long pause, Sarah looked at him and smiled. "We're starting to pass it on, Mr. Walker. We talk about what you taught us to others, just like you did with us." David nodded, a sense of pride in his eyes. "It feels right. Like we're carrying something important forward." Thomas could feel the weight of their words. It was moments like this, when you could see the impact of your actions on others, that made everything worthwhile. "I'm proud of all of you," he said softly. "You've become the people I hoped you would. You found your courage, and now you're sharing it. That's how it spreads, that's how it lasts." As the sun began to set, casting a soft, golden light over the park, the group stood up, ready to leave. They weren't just walking away from a conversation, they were walking away with something more, something that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Thomas watched them go, his heart filled with a quiet satisfaction. They had learned the lesson, they had lived it, and now they were passing it on. That was all he had ever hoped for. He stood for a moment, taking in the park one last time, the wind rustling through the trees. And with a final glance at the horizon, he turned and walked home, knowing that, in his own way, he had made a difference.